Changing the game through real estate. I can never wait. Got what it takes to get this on my plate, and I got a budget to teach you how to.
Sure. So almost 11 years ago, I was driving across the country in a camper from Florida to California, and I kept looking at all these RV parks, and I'm like, hey, it's just renting parking spots. This has got to be easy. It is not renting parking spots. There's so much more to it. You're running this full-fledged business. But by the time I got to California, I had been Google searching RV parks for sale and how to buy an RV park. And I found one in bankruptcy that was owned by the bank in the town, near the town that I lived in. And I contacted the bank and said, hey, I want to buy this property. And they're like, well, how much money do you have? I was 26 and it's like, I don't have any money. And so this was after the market had collapsed, and banks had things on their books that they needed to get rid of, that they were essentially trying to operate themselves. So they gave me a loan for non-recourse with no money down for $3.2 million. And I had to figure out how to run an RV park.
So curious, at that point, had you purchased like a home or anything before, or was this like your first real estate?
I had a house. Yeah, I had my personal residency. I didn't even know I had bought real estate at that point. You know, I knew nothing about real estate or real estate investing or RV parks or any of that at that time. So yes, I was totally blind and in the dark.
So how did all that come about though? Like, did you just like wake up one day and have a vision of you dreaming? It's like, oh, I'm supposed to be buying RV parks. Like, how did that like?
I might be mildly impulsive. And so I think there's something to be said with, I'm sure you talk to beginner investors all the time, and they have all this knowledge and they know more sometimes than you and I do. And you're like, dude, why haven't you bought anything yet? Like, just get started. What are you waiting for? And so there's something to be said about just jumping in, because a lot of it is stuff that you can't be taught, you know, mistakes that you have to learn yourself. You're not going to listen to somebody else. And there's something to be said for just jumping in and getting started. I never imagined that RV parks and mobile home parks would be my thing. But I love it. It's lots of fun.
So once they gave you like, okay, well, here you go. Here's a loan for a RV park for $3 million, $3.2 million. Then what? Then you like, thank you. Like what like how do you go about like figuring that out? Like,
so day one at closing, I remember it because it was April 1st, and I brought my mother to closing with me. I don't know if it was supposed to be support or what. And she's like, is this April Fool's? Like, what are you doing? And kind of like a construction loan, they gave me 6 months of interest only to kind of get it figured out. And even interest only on that big of a loan is huge. And there's utilities and all these bills. And I got the first utility bill. And, you know, owning a home, I had been used to, you know, my $200 electric bill. And this one was like $12,000 for electricity. And so there's some pretty big OMG, what am I going to do moments when you first get started with that. And so the first 6 months I slept in the office floor trying to figure out how to run an RV park.
So when you bought the RV park, did it come with like its own office or anything? It had a certain amount of spaces. Did it have its own like staff at all? Like, did it have anything?
Yeah. So there's an office, 2 pools, a fishing pond, and 2 bathhouses. There were 100 sites, and they had 100 people living there with mailboxes outside and refrigerators outside. They were paying $300 a month, and that included their site and all their utilities. Basically, they were losing money on them being there. And the staff kind of had a staff. There was an old lady who was in her 80s, and she sat in the office all day and like took people's money. She was like almost like a house mom, if you think of like a fraternity or sorority house. A super nice old lady that was just making sure everybody was paying, and that was about it.
Nice.
That had to be a weird experience, like day one, like showing up like, hey guys, they just gave me this RV park, and so now what?
Now what?
I know. I can remember one of the tenants coming in, throwing this huge fit, and he's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm like, dude, the bank owns it. That's as broke as it gets. Like, what do you mean?
Oh, that's good. So how many slots were there?
So when I bought that one, it had 100 sites.
Okay.
Since then, I've added 21 cabins and 15 glamping tents,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's a full-fledged resort now. It grosses about $2.5 million a year. It's worth
Nice.
about $13 million now. So that one's doing awesome and pumping out the money and really
How
great.
long did it take you to kind of get that being successful?
To flip it.
Yeah, it took me a couple years because honestly, I like I said, I didn't even know I'd bought real estate. I wasn't in real estate. I didn't know anything about running a business. So to really learn all of that took me a couple years to figure out the marketing. There weren't resources like there now are on the internet and YouTube and all these things that you can watch and figure things out and connect with other people. So it took me probably 3 years to really get going to make that property start making money.
And what did that process look like? Did you come in and like all those RV tenants were you like, you gotta go, I'm putting in like cabins and stuff? Or
So the 100 sites are still there, and I gradually flip them to. So in the RV industry, if you think of it like maybe multifamily, you have short-term RV parks and long-term RV parks. And this one happens to be in the middle of a tourist town, so you don't want long-term tenants there. However, you don't want no income. Those long-term tenants were still bringing in, thousands of dollars a month with the couple that were there, and that's better than nothing. So I gradually converted the sites, 10 sites at a time, to short-term versus that long-term. And back then, like we said, the Facebook was kind of the big social media thing. So I created a Facebook account and started trying to reach RVers that way. And I started doing Google Pay for Clicks and Google AdWords. And that was a big source for the first round of clients I started getting for the park.
nice.
Yeah, because I can imagine that could be nerve-wracking because you have that massive loan that's all interest only, and it's like, oh wow, now I have to get a bunch of people here in order for me to do all these things. But
Well, and it's a seasonal property. RV parks aren't necessarily year round. That property is 10 months. So at least it's 10 months. There's a lot of RV parks that are 4, 5, 6 months in the Northeast or Midwest that are a little bit shorter term, which is fine, if you have a plan and you budgeted accordingly. But if you're walking in blind, I don't think that would work very well.
So where was this one located?
That one's in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee.
Okay. Very cool. Nice.
yeah, I've heard about over there really well. So what happened next? Like, so you got this property, it started getting right. Did you think like, oh, I'm just gonna focus on this one, or do you like, let's try it again. Let's see if I can get
So
it.
I think it took being introduced to some higher level investors and understanding, first of all, that I had bought real estate and that it was a neat niche asset class that could make really good money. And so I bought the next thing that I bought was a duplex, though. It wasn't, I kind of went backwards where, most people get their duplex first. I kind of went backwards because having short-term RV parks, it is a full-fledged business. That property has about 10 different streams of income coming in between golf cart rentals and the laundry facility. There's a pizza kitchen there. There's all these different streams of income. So it's a full-fledged active business. This is not something that's passive. Now I own enough properties that I manage the managers. I'm in Florida now. But I can manage them from a distance. But back then when I was running that, I'm like, dang, I don't want to do this forever. So I started buying the duplexes and the triplexes thinking, okay, I want to kind of stabilize my portfolio and have some stuff that's a little more passive for someday when I decide to sell this property. But as I started getting into things like that, I started learning about leveraging debt. And I realized, oh my gosh, I have so much equity in this property. I can pull it out and start buying other properties. And so, I had less than $3 million in debt at that point on a $13 million property. So I bought a couple other RV parks, some mobile home parks. I now have multifamily Section 8 properties. So learning that, meeting the higher level investors and learning things like how to leverage debt was a huge game changer for me.
So what was your process of going into like buying a duplex and then buying the mobile home parks and stuff like that? So what made you like, did you just like, how did you find the deals? Did you just know from other people? Did you partner with people? Like, how did that process go?
Yep. So the duplexes, the first duplex I bought off the MLS, which is the easiest way when you don't really know what you're looking at and you don't really know what you're doing. I think for somebody who's a beginner, that's definitely the easiest thing to do. And I was also a broker for the fourth largest commercial real estate firm in the world for 4 years. And so I covered the US and Canada for them for RV parks and mobile home parks. And so this was after I had already bought an RV park. And so I learned a ton about mobile home parks also, but mobile home parks are a pretty competitive asset class and their cap rates are pretty low, meaning for the buyer, they can be very expensive and your return isn't that great if you don't really know what you're doing. So it takes a little bit longer to find those mobile home parks than to find something more like a duplex or triplex. So I was buying those smaller multifamily asset classes until I ran into, I have 4 mobile home parks now. So until I came across those that were within the area, I mainly buy in East Tennessee. So I have a team there of about 30 people. And so it took me a little bit to run across some within my territory that met my buying parameters.
Are they all like the tourist like resort style, or do you have any long-term ones?
So mobile home parks and RV parks are very different, are two very different things. And so I have the RV parks, and RV parks can be both long-term and short-term. The short-term RV parks can be even different within themselves. So you can have the resort style that you go to and there's a huge water park and, there's hay rides and people go and they never leave the property. And then you can have parks that are short term, but they're on the side of an interstate. There are people who are going on a really long road trip and they stop to sleep there overnight, just like maybe a Holiday Inn on the side of the interstate might be. Got RV parks just like that. And then you have those seasonal short-term parks that we were talking about that might be in the north. And what happens there is those people will leave their RVs there for a season. So sometimes they're paying a seasonal rate of a couple $1,000s and they're going to leave their RV there for a couple months. Think of this like their lake house. They live somewhere within, a couple hours of the property and they go here on the weekends for fun, which is still kind of a short-term thing because your guests are coming and going, but it's a little bit long-term because you don't need to get new tenants or customers every 2 to 3 days.
You said mobile home parks, like the returns aren't as great. So why do you think?
So the returns, they can be. So mobile home parks have gotten a lot more institutional over the last 10 years. You can't get new zoning and permitting oftentimes. There's definitely some exceptions to that to build new mobile home parks because the cities don't want them there. And sometimes you can, but more often than not, you can't. And so the way that the mobile home parks operate is really attractive because you're just renting out the land. So you're collecting just lot rent. There's park-owned homes and tenant-owned homes, which is a whole nother conversation on, and institutional buyers typically only buy parks that have tenant-owned homes. And so because of that, and they're less active assets, meaning not as much management, they will pay those lower cap rates. So they'll get lower returns. But because they're large institutions, their money is cheaper than you or me who might go to the bank and get a normal bank loan. They have private investors that have different expectations than, say, a bank would of us.
And the tenant's not really going to leave because they can't really take up their whole house. And
it costs them $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to move their house somewhere else.
That's interesting. So doing all this, what's your favorite one? Because you sound like you had RV parks, you have short term, you have like all these different things. Which one is your favorite?
It's funny. So a lot of people have a mentor or a relative or somebody to kind of walk them through this. And I didn't have anybody. I was guessing all along the way. So I bought a couple different asset classes to dabble in some different things and figure out what it was. And one of the things I bought was student housing. I hate student housing. There's so many people who love student housing and they make awesome money on student housing. It was not for me. I think going from, Section 8 tenants to students that like need their toilet plunged and can't change their light bulb just wasn't for me. So I can tell you what my favorite is not. But I do love the RV parks. The limitless options for making extra money and the side hustles at each of those properties are a lot of fun. I was just doing the inventory for one of the camp stores, and the camp store alone at that property brought in $200,000 year to date. So even the fun side of that, of getting to pick out all this stuff that the campers are going to buy and that you're going to sell in that property, or, the side hustle of the laundry machines. I really like the flexibility of the RV parks, and it's a huge growing industry. And it's bigger than most people realize. It's a $115 billion industry, which is 2.2% of our GDP. So it's kind of this hidden asset class that not everybody's paid attention to.
Yeah, so don't tell anyone about it until you buy it all, right?
Exactly. Make sure you bought everything you want before you start telling
It is
everybody.
cool though, that the fact that like even like mobile home parks, a lot of time it's just like one income, but with RV parks you can have like multiple streams of income inside that one piece of property. I think that's really cool.
It is
'Cause you
neat.
almost
And
have all these separate businesses that all make you money because it's almost like almost limited potential.
Yeah, it's like your own little city, basically.
Yeah.
it is.
Sounds
Even the
like-
amount of firewood that we sell is like just astronomical. And so there's also another side of that, because you're, like we talked about, you're actively managing a business. It's not just real estate. And so within that, you're running it with a software. And so the software that I use is called CampSpot, and they have this really neat thing called dynamic pricing. And so I switched to that. I think it was 3 years ago. And so there's two. There's a lot of great things about the software, but there's two that really make a difference: the dynamic pricing and the site optimization. So I'll explain that to you. So, like we talked about, running an RV park, a huge part of it is operations. You're running a full-fledged business. And one of the most important pieces there is going to be your software. And so I converted to a significantly more sophisticated software a couple years ago. It's called CampSpot. And there's two things I really like about it. So one of them is called dynamic pricing. And this is something that you'll see in a hotel, or maybe in the way an airline operates. As people who own multifamily or even single family homes, you think of, oh, well, how much is your rent? I rent it out for $1,200 a month or something like that. Well, with dynamic pricing, I can have a base rate of, say, $50 a night. But depending on what's going on in the area, or if it's a holiday, or maybe it's the summertime and it's really demanding, I can set my base rate. And then at 50% occupancy, my price increases 10% every 10% of occupancy. So that site may be bringing in more like $100 a night once that occupancy increases. And that alone grew my revenue by 50% a couple years ago when I switched to software. I say that alone, the dynamic pricing mixed with the site optimization. Because if you picture the way this works is you've got all of your site numbers down one column and the dates that people are going to visit on another. And if somebody books and says, hey, I want to stay in site number 10, and they book site number 10, and then someone's like, I want to stay in site number 12, but they're coming these dates later, then you can't book that site there. And you have this kind of block. But if you don't let people pick those sites and the software is able to optimize that and move them here, then you've opened up a whole nother week to bring in another couple $1,000. So that sophistication of the software within your operations is a huge game changer.
Yeah, I've heard someone do that for like short-term Airbnbs and stuff like
Yes.
that. They've done that a lot, but that was the first time I've heard it for like something other than that. So
Yes.
do you I guess, do you have your own personal site and you have where you pick your day and you use that accordingly?
Exactly. So even though I have short-term rentals there, I don't need a platform like Airbnb in order to be able to rent those out.
Right.
Do you
Very
use Airbnb for them or no?
I don't need that platform, and they stay in the
That's awesome.
90s in occupancy.
Yeah,
Very
that's good.
cool.
At least they don't take like part of your money
Exactly.
either.
You're not
Yeah.
paying that fee.
So, what other lessons have you learned, like almost being like as an asset manager over a lot of these like RV parks and mobile home parks and everything like that? What are some of the main key things that you learned as like an operator?
I think it's important to know where what your position is and what your role is, because a lot of times we're still small business owners. So a lot of times you feel like, I don't know if people think they're the best at everything, or they think that they just have to be the one that does everything. I can remember my second year running the office in that first property, and I was married at the time. And my ex-husband looked at me and he said, "Did you just hang up on somebody?" And they were yelling at me and saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and I just hung up the phone. And a normal customer service rep would have said something really great and maybe turn the conversation around or whatever. That's not me. Like, I do not have the personality for that position, but I have a fabulous property manager now, and she has the personality for that. She can turn around any conversation and make it a positive outcome for the guest. Like, learning what your role is and what your role isn't is really important when you're operating a property like that.
So what is your role? What do you love to do?
I love the visionary side of that and figuring out all of those side hustles and figuring out, what we're going to offer the guests next and what kind of activities we're going to have at the property. What's going to be inside that camp store that we're selling. Hey, we're going to start renting golf carts because that's trending. A big thing in the industry now is all these unique experiences. So adding the glamping portion of the property, that visionary side of it is my favorite part of the role. I also really enjoy managing my staff. The property manager that I just talked about, her and then another maintenance manager that I have, I couldn't have what I have today without both of them. And one of them had been to prison and came to me straight out of prison needing a job, and seeing him turn his life around and have a family now and being a great dad and being able to support his family. I love that part of my job. And so it's not quite that daily active inside the business that's for me.
Yeah, so you like working on the business, not necessarily in the business. But that's what they always say, that like if you really want to grow your business, you can't work in your business. You got to work on it.
You probably couldn't work in your business and hang up on customers and still have a business either.
Do you think though, like starting out, that was important to your success? Like you just diving in and doing it all yourself? That way
Absolutely.
you knew what you needed out of people?
Absolutely. And there's definitely a time in everybody's business, unless you're, given some money or marry into some money or something like that, that you do wear a lot of hats and you play all those roles and you need to know how to do all those roles. And I can step in and run the office for a little bit, but I definitely have a limit where I'm done. Like, I'm not the one for that role.
So one of the main things we're kind of dealing with now is like, how do you, because you just said you were married, how do you kind of deal with everything? Hey, you have these dreams you want to accomplish, but hey, you have maybe a family and kids. How do you kind of do everything?
Well, it didn't work out for me. I've been divorced 4 years, so I am not a good example of that. There are a lot of people who seem to do well. And the thing I notice the most with the people who do well is they divide the roles and they stay in their lane. If you say, Timothy, you're going to be in charge of maintenance and, you're going to run the office. Timothy probably shouldn't give you any opinions on running the office, and you probably shouldn't give him any opinions on maintenance. Otherwise, it's more like you're each other's boss, and it's a little harder to get along than if you pick those lanes and just go with it.
Yeah, stay responsible for your own thing. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about with like having kids, because you want to be there for them and their journey and everything, but you can't just go in the office and sleep on the floor.
So I got pregnant with my first child the same month I bought my first property. So I have 3 kids now, and I drag them everywhere, and I homeschool, and I am not the typical parent. I don't believe in the way people parent now, where kids are in 27 different sports and parents' lives are totally ruined because you're at every practice and every game, and it creates this entitled child that thinks the whole world revolves around them. And they also don't know how to be bored and creative because they've been entertained their whole lives. So my kids, my daughter, on her last birthday, I bought her first mobile home, and she gets to learn how to do her little profit. Say it again.
How old is she?
She's 9, my oldest.
Awesome.
And so she gets to learn how to do her profit and loss statement and schedule her person to mow the grass. And if they call a complaint, she gets to learn to find a plumber and things like that. So I think teaching them those life skills are a whole lot more important than the way a traditional family operates in the United States now. So it's learning to be okay having a different lifestyle than some people have.
Yeah.
Is she better at like HR stuff? Like,
Yes. Yes.
That's I feel like I'd be really bad at HR. That's like Emily's
That's what I
wheelhouse.
do
Yeah.
professionally. Yeah.
That's
That's
like that's
awesome.
all she does.
That's
I'd be really
awesome. You'll see pictures of me, and I've got one kid strapped to the front of me. I got one kid strapped to the back of me, and then there's a maintenance guy over here, and he's got a kid strapped to him too. Like,
there you
you
go.
just make it work.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So I guess back to the property, like was that RV park, is that your most successful one you've had so far?
So I think people measure success on different things. You know, some people are looking for cash on cash. Some people are looking for kind of that year over year growth, and they want the equity. So cash on cash for sure. I mean, that place is killing it. I have a couple mobile home parks that do really well also, that I like a lot. They don't have as much flexibility as that property does, and honestly, both asset classes did shockingly well through the pandemic. I
Yeah.
was really surprised by, you know, all my tenants paid. The people were still camping. Actually, camping has grown tremendously throughout
Yeah.
the pandemic because people
Yeah.
wanted that seclusion. So definitely the RV parks and mobile home parks have been the most successful.
So are you the manage them all, or do you own them all yourself? Like it's just you, or are you have partners also?
I do. I am the sole owner of all of them, which
Good for you.
Nice. Well done.
thanks. And so I have about $30 million in real estate right now, but my goal is that by my 40th birthday to have 200 million. So I only have a couple years left. So I just finished all the paperwork for a fund, and we'll start syndicating some of those RV parks moving forward, working with some partners.
So is that just RV parks or like mobile home parks also?
Both. Again, the mobile home parks are a little more uh, competitive. So I
Yeah.
don't imagine I will end up with quite as many mobile home parks in that portfolio, but definitely nice to have them stabilize the portfolio.
I guess going forward, are you kind of the lone wolf? Are you doing it all by yourself, or are you and your team? I mean, or do you have partners also?
Yeah, so I am gonna bring partners on for moving forward. The deal I just left, and I'm in the middle of writing my LOI when I'm done with y'all, is $40 million. That's a little out of my budget. I'm gonna
Yeah.
need some partners on that one.
There you go.
So obviously the whole mobile home RV parks are like your niche as far as real
Yes.
estate. But do you also look for more like duplexes and quadplexes and all that to keep your options open, or is this kind of what you're running with since it's working so well?
So I would buy so I do well with networking in the areas that I buy in, and I would buy duplexes or triplexes that are near some of the other stuff that I own. Um, and I kind of specialize in that smaller multifamily when it comes to a different type of asset class. It seems to be stuff that's more like 6 to 20 units. I buy those that are extremely distressed. Like the last one, I had to repair the foundation and everything, but they work out as really great BRRRR deals. The last one I bought was a 12 unit, and I paid $300,000 for it. Put a couple thousand in, or a couple $100,000 in, and then it appraised for 1.2 million. Pulled the money out and went and bought the next one. So I do the BRRRR deals on the smaller multifamily.
Very cool.
Okay. I guess one of my questions is I don't really see that many like RV parks for sale. So where do you go about like finding like RV parks for sale to buy?
Yeah, they're definitely not on the MLS. And so a big part of it is relationships. The last one not the $40 million one, the one before that, was one of my neighbors. I've been begging him to let me buy his park for 3 years. And he finally texts me and is like, Heather, I think I'm ready to sell. So a lot of it is relationships, because that asset class is 88% owned by mom and pops. So
Yeah.
most of it is small business owners. And so building a relationship with those people in areas that you're looking to buy in, it's kind of your long game. But as far as short term, people who are like, okay, I want to buy by the end of the year, LoopNet and Crexy are both sites that have commercial real estate on them in places that you're going to find more RV parks or mobile home parks listed.
So if someone was interested in, so I guess someone listened to the podcast and they say, "Oh, I want to get into RV parks." What would you suggest is the best way to get in that? If they were like you and they didn't want to partner and join the fund, what would they do?
So, because all of this was so hard to figure out when I first started, and I feel like my learning curve should have been shorter, um, I started my social media account like 6 months ago, which I think is how we found each other.
Yes.
And I started posting all these TikToks and Instagram reels about RV parks. And I couldn't believe how many people were interested in it. I think I'm at 30,000 followers on TikTok now of all these people who are interested in like renting their campers out and all these different things. So you can find a ton of free information on social media on the properties, as well as I teach a class and have a mastermind group. So it's a lot easier for people to get that information now. But as far as financing goes, which I think is where your question was headed a little bit, because the properties are less institutional, a higher percentage of them are willing to owner finance than you might find in like a duplex or a triplex.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can get owner financing. You can also go through your local banks and credit unions. They're easier to deal with than a larger institutional bank might be to get financing. But the reality is they aren't cheap. You know, you're not buying that one unit or those 2 units. Typically, you know, even a small park might have 20 sites. So you're looking at a couple $100,000 into the millions of dollars. So, and they're commercial loans. You can't get your house hacking 3.5% FHA loan and go try out for the first time. So it seems to be not that you can't start out with RVs, because you can, but you need to have either some partners or some investors if you haven't already saved a good amount of money. I know that a good bit of my students, they have some form of smaller portfolio that they're transitioning out of. Maybe they're going to sell 3 or 4 of their duplexes and go buy their first RV park, or they're refinancing out because of the growth they've seen in their properties lately and using that money that they've used from the refi, and they're going to buy an RV park now.
So how do you know an RV park is a good deal? Because then it's not like, you see like an apartment building. I feel like it's not as like generic. Like you look at cap rates, here's your return. You know everyone. You kind of know the area. I feel like kind of being an RV park is kind of like you almost kind of be like kind of creative.
It's like a hit or miss.
Yeah.
It is. It's more of an art than a science. You know, when you're talking about you're looking at an apartment building, you kind of got your 5 or 6 things you're looking for. Okay, how much is the insurance? What's the rent roll? How much are they paying in taxes? You got your checklist of things that you're going through. And because an RV park is a full-fledged business, you're looking at a profit and loss statement. And there's a ton of different lines on your income because, like we just talked about, you've got all these additional side hustles. You've got short-term rentals and long-term rentals and alternative accommodations and all these different things mixed in. And then same on the expense side. So you're really learning how to read a profit and loss statement for that asset class is key to figuring out what the property is actually worth, because you'll notice things where you're like, why is your electric bill so cheap? Are you sure that's right? Or, why is the water bill so high? Looking through and actually learning how to read that is really important to making sure you're getting a good deal.
So there's not necessarily anything kind of specific of like what you kind of want to see numbers wise to make it a good deal or a bad deal.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to buy. So some people like buying turnkey properties that are already ready to go. And then they're going to be looking for very specific things that are going to have to do with, are there any deferred maintenance? Is there a team already in place that's going to stay? Anybody who is looking for turnkey properties would be looking for different things than I like buying distressed properties that I can turn around. And I want operations to be distressed. I want their technology to be wrong. I want their sites to need improvement, because that's where you make the money to pull it out and go buy the next one.
Yeah. So you're always looking at something like, hey, like they do this really bad. I know I can make this better, so I can make it more successful.
Yeah. They're taking their reservations on paper still. Like we can implement software and have 25% growth tomorrow, So
it's like the reason this business is struggling right now is because they do not have me right now.
Yes, they need some systems and processes in place and they'd be good to go.
So let's say, for instance, for me, I was looking at an RV park right now. I wanted to like invest because around here in Virginia, like the Peaks of Otter and like Blue Ridge Parkway is really big for like campgrounds and everything like that.
Yeah.
So let's say, like, how do you even find the owners and reach out to the owners of the RV parks?
Sure. So there is a website called Good Sam, and Good Sam is a camping membership that people who go camping belong to. And so Good Sam goes through the whole country and they rate each park with 3 ratings. And it has to do with their facilities, like how nice the bathrooms are, what their grounds look like. But the reason that's important to you is if you go to that website, you can type in a town and you'll see all of the RV parks that are available in that town for a consumer to go stay at. Well, you as an investor now know which properties are there and could start cold calling or sending out mail outs, going to visit them, whatever your method for getting deals is. There's your list of people to go look for.
So DM all the 1 stars.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty good. I didn't think of that, because I was looking at once I started learning more about you on social media and what you were doing, I was looking at it. I was like, man, I don't even know how to go about even finding these RV parks, because I remember going to camping as a kid over there, and I mean, I just remember everything was like run down. I just don't know how do I even what the process is to do that. So
yeah, and run down. It depends on which parts run down. You know, if it's a property that is using city water and city sewer, their rundown isn't going to be as expensive as somebody on private utilities that has a packaging plant that's, you know, a couple $100,000 for you to replace just to get the sewer going. So those rundown really depends on what exactly is run down.
Yeah.
So, I know Emily loves these so much, but like tiny homes, and I think you mentioned them earlier. Do you have those on your RV park? And if so, do like people actually like them as much as like my wife says they like them?
They're just trendy right now.
Emily and I are going to be best friends. They're one of my favorite things. So I do have a property that has 21 of them, and it's part of the whole glamping craze. The tiny homes aren't actually something that's legal. They either need to be built as a manufactured home or as an RV. So in order to be properly permitted to be in some locations, they need to be what's called RVIA certified. So they're built on a chassis. I'm sure you've seen all the shows with them being built, and they need to be permitted by somebody for the city to allow them to be there. And so they're essentially campers. They even meet the same requirements. They have to be 399 square feet or less. And so I have 21 of those in one location, and they run just like an Airbnb would. They're short-term rentals. They have an average stay of 3 days, and those 21 bring in about $500,000 a year. So they have been a really neat addition to that property.
Did you have any like doubts on like, oh, I'm gonna put tiny homes here or anything like that? Because I feel like it's like, hey, it sounds cool, but it's almost like a little nerve wracking. Like, let's say it's all like this one campground. It's just campgrounds. How do I know that the tiny homes are gonna be successful? You just kind of just had to go for it and hope for the best.
I don't think you can sit and think about any of it, because you will. Yeah. There's a book called actually, it's right here. Emily needs to buy you this. It's called The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. If you aren't familiar with it, she talks about how any of those kinds of things, you count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and just do it. Because if you sit and think about any of that stuff, you're going to talk yourself out of it. You can come up with a million reasons to not do everything.
So were you reading this book at the campground? Is this how all this happened?
No, I have a ton of students that have the same kind of thing. So like, I just don't know if it's a good idea. Stop thinking about it. Just do it. Just do it. And because once you do it, you have no choice but to go all in and get really aggressive. Yeah, you've got to make it work. Yeah. You know, some people will kind of dip their toe in the water and buy 2 or 3. I bought 15 when I first started. So they needed to work. Like, so there's no turning back.
Yeah.
So with you saying that, was there any hard lessons and stories that you had to kind of deal with through the 5 seconds to go for it?
I think the hardest things for me have been dealing with city planning and zoning. They are no joke. And so even I built a new playground like 2 years ago, and I had to have a contractor sign off on it, and like different things for installing it. Once you get into those commercial deals, dealing with planning and zoning is so much more difficult and necessary than when you have a duplex or a triplex. So learning to dot all your I's and cross all your T's with city planning and zoning has probably been some of my biggest lessons.
So I know, just to wrap up, you said you mentioned you're doing a fund. Can you tell us kind of like what's your, I guess your offering for like new investors and stuff like that?
Yes, we just finished out all of the legal paperwork, and it's called Blank Capital. My last name is Blankenship, and so all those details will be released soon on the fund. But it's for people looking to invest with better returns than they might get in the stock market, or definitely than their savings account, but not somebody who wants to go out and put all the effort in that we do as real estate investors.
I feel like it's got like RV parks. It might have a little bit more risk, but I feel like the upside is a lot more though.
It is, and the risk isn't as high as you would think with when you look at the year-over-year trends over the last decade or even longer. It's had that steady 20 to 30% growth every year. It's just gotten more mainstream as COVID has hit. The media seem to pay a little bit more attention to it. So it's not as risky and trendy as it might sound. It's just getting more attention lately.
Nice.
Okay.
Well, where can we find you as far as your different parks and social media and all that?
Yes, you can go to my website at heatherblankenship.com, or on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm Heather Blankenship X3.
Nice. All right.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on here, and I've learned a lot, and I learned the book I had to do. I have to read
book
now.
He's got to
So.
read.
And if I start making tons of things happen, I can thank you for my success.
Yes, Mel Robbins all the way.
Yeah.